The next and final phase of the planning process is to create a formal microgrid development plan. A successful community microgrid development plan will organize and summarize all the planning work done to date and will serve as the basis for seeking funding for a full-scale, audit-grade technical feasibility study. Funding for such a study could come from the municipality itself, from a grant program like the New Jersey BPU's Town Center Distributed Energy Resource Microgrid Feasibility Study Incentive Program, or from a third party, like an energy services company or even the local utility interested in developing the microgrid described in the plan. Although there are many variations, most successful microgrid development plans include a mix of the following key components that provide useful information in and of themselves and that are also needed as the basis for an effective technical feasibility study. These components include the project name, a project description, a review of project partners and key stakeholders, a section on conceptual design, a section on cost and financing, benefits, a discussion of potential ownership models, a discussion of the role of the local utility, a feasibility study outline, and a description of the feasibility study team proposed for the microgrid. Let's look at each of these sections in a bit more detail. A key first step, even though it may come at the very end of the process, is to provide the microgrid development with a name. The name should be simple and clear, such as the town name and then community microgrid. In the case of Neptune, the community chose to name their project the Neptune Township Advanced Microgrid, NTAM. The project description section of the plan should address at least 5 separate topics: a municipal narrative, a set of baseline data, a discussion of resiliency issues, an updated master spreadsheet for the project, and an updated map. Let's unpack each of these in a little bit more detail. The project description section should begin with an overview of the municipality and should explain why the municipality both requires a microgrid and why a microgrid will work there. The overview should also discuss any work the municipality has done with respect to improving its overall energy profile, such as any local government energy audits that have been conducted, any energy efficiency upgrade work that may have been performed, whether any energy savings improvement plan projects have been implemented, the status of the municipality's energy master plan, etc. In addition, any existing local generation assets that may be valuable to the microgrid. For example, an existing combined heat and power system that will be incorporated into the microgrid plan should also be discussed. A key goal is to describe the municipality in terms of its existing energy advantages as part of the overall discussion concerning why the community microgrid proposed in the plan makes sense for this particular jurisdiction. The next section of the project description should include a set of baseline data, much of which will have been generated over the preceding phases of the planning process. These would include the project location and its scale, the population the microgrid project will serve, how this population will be engaged in the project, the total geographical project area, the project size in terms of how much power it will generate and the type of loads it will serve, the percentage of power production that is fossil fueled, and the percentage that is renewable power, the proposed technologies and systems that will be used, both new and existing, and the project stakeholders, participating customers and properties, types and scale of facilities, number and types of critical facilities included in the microgrid plan. Project description should also discuss resiliency issues. Has the population been impacted by a severe weather event? If so, how extensive was the area impacted and how much damage was sustained? How will the microgrid project improve resiliency and help protect this population from the impacts of future weather events? How specifically will the project contribute to overall community resiliency? What critical functions will it support during an electrical service outage and for how long? This section should also describe if and how your town can effectively manage and maintain critical primary evacuation, rescue, and supply routes in an emergency. It should describe, as appropriate, applicable transit corridors, including trains and buses, and describe why the town where the microgrid will be located is favorable for the implementation of the microgrid. The project description should also include the master spreadsheet that has been developed over the course of the planning process and the map of potential sites that accompanies it. In all likelihood, both of these documents will be updated as the microgrid development plan is fleshed out and completed. In Neptune, the master spreadsheet that was originally created was modified and refined to identify 3 separate microgrid clusters. Likewise, its maps were further refined to identify these 3 clusters. Let's unpack the Neptune example in a bit more detail. As can be seen on the slide, the original Neptune master spreadsheet identified 27 potential facilities that could work within a microgrid in that community. This is a master list only. As you can see, it's alphabetized and has not been prioritized. That process will be undertaken during the finalization of the microgrid development plan. Likewise, the original map, created based on the spreadsheet for Neptune, identified 27 critical facilities, but has not yet prioritized them or organized them into identifiable and prioritized clusters. The updated master spreadsheet for Neptune depicted on the slide indicates the results of the additional analysis done during the microgrid development plan phase. 3 key clusters were identified as A, B, and C, and they were prioritized in terms of their level of feasibility and criticality. Let's look at each of these 3 clusters and their accompanying maps in a bit more detail. Cluster A on the Neptune master spreadsheet lists 12 critical facilities, many of which are either FEMA Category 3 or 4, within a relatively distinct and tight geographical area. These facilities also include a solid anchor site, the Jersey Shore University Medical Center, and the entire cluster has been identified as the first priority cluster for the town. Taking a look at Cluster A on the site map of Neptune, it can be seen that the 12 facilities are indeed tightly located together, making the potential for a tight distribution network amongst and between them more likely and contributing to their listing as the first priority cluster. Cluster B on the Neptune master spreadsheet identifies an additional 10 facilities. There are relatively more FEMA Category 2 facilities in this list, but the facilities are still important and may be a viable addition to Cluster A if the technical feasibility cost-benefit analysis indicates that that will work. Cluster A, however, remains the top priority. As can be seen on the map, Cluster B is directly adjacent to Cluster A and could conceivably serve an extension of Cluster A if the cost-benefit analysis pencils out. On its own, it's not as strong a candidate as Cluster A, but still worth exploring during the technical feasibility study to determine whether or how Cluster A and Cluster B might work together. And finally, Cluster C on the Neptune master spreadsheet. Cluster C is basically an outlier. The energy profile for these 5 facilities is not strong, especially in terms of a high energy use anchor site, but the facilities identified are all critical in terms of overall community resilience. Although it's unlikely that Cluster C could cost-effectively become part of Cluster A or B, it is possible that Cluster C or parts of it could be provided with their own distributed energy generation assets, such as photovoltaics or another form of backup generation, assuming that the economics pencil out. The facilities in Cluster C are considered to be of sufficient importance from a resilience perspective that it is worthwhile to assess their viability as a microgrid as part of the technical feasibility study. As the map indicates, Cluster C is indeed an outlier, with a series of scattered sites that are important from a resiliency perspective but may be difficult to cost-effectively incorporate into a microgrid. Clusters A and B are on the right of the image. This section of the development plan should list and briefly describe the different types of stakeholders that are included in the proposed microgrid project. For example, representatives from local government units like the mayor's office and other agencies, local electric and gas utility representatives, local or regional emergency management organizations, microgrid customers and facilities that will be sites on the microgrid, nonprofit organization stakeholders who will be involved in the process, the project developers, contractors, and vendors if they are known, and any technical consultants if they are known. It can be helpful to group at least some of the facility stakeholders that are identified as part of this section of the development plan, based on differences in how their facilities operate and how they procure power. This will be useful during the feasibility study when potential microgrid sites are evaluated in terms of their energy use profiles and their energy procurement structures, as a means to optimize the overall microgrid configuration in terms of its power needs and the procurement practices of its users. This section of the plan can also describe the municipality's experience collaborating and sharing services with other public agencies, such as local government agencies, school districts, state government, county government, and public agencies, as well as with local private and nonprofit agencies. These descriptions will provide insight during the feasibility study phase concerning the municipality's potential role in guiding the microgrid development process, and even in possible ownership of the microgrid itself. As can be seen in the Neptune example, a wide range of public and private companies, organizations, and agencies will be involved in the development of the Neptune Township Advanced Microgrid and in the feasibility study. Roles and responsibilities for these entities will be analyzed and more clearly defined over the course of the technical feasibility study. In this section of the development plan, a general description of the overall design and configuration of the proposed microgrid should be presented, including the distributed energy resource generation technologies being considered, a description of the proposed connections of the critical facilities to each other, to the DER technologies, and to the macrogrid, and an overview of the proposed distribution system layout for the microgrid itself. Depending on the municipality and its resources, an external energy consultant may be recommended at this point to help finish the microgrid development plan. Key distributed energy resource technology questions that need to be addressed in this part of the microgrid development plan include: how much power will be generated by the microgrid? What type of load will the generation serve? What percentage of power production is fossil fuel based and what percentage is renewable? What are the proposed technologies and systems? And how many of them are new, and how many are already existing? And how many backup days will the entire system serve? Key questions about the overall configuration of the proposed microgrid also need to be addressed during this section of the microgrid development plan. These would include: what will your microgrid look like? What sites will be included? What configuration and distribution layout does it have? What geographic features make it favorable, such as elevation and other elements of the landscape? How much energy does the microgrid consume, and what is the peak energy usage of the microgrid? Additional questions that this section of the plan might address include: what are the anticipated annual hours of operation for non-emergency operational conditions? Are any energy efficiency projects planned as part of the overall project? If so, what are they and how will they be implemented? Is this project scalable? Are there plans to replicate it elsewhere in this jurisdiction, and if so, what are they? And any other information that could be helpful in describing the proposed conceptual design for the microgrid should be included at this time. In this section of the plan, a general description of the potential cost of the microgrid, including not only generation, but the infrastructure, controls, and other aspects of the project, should be generated. This only needs to be a ballpark estimate, and it should be noted that multi-user community microgrids typically cost in the many millions of dollars and can easily reach the tens of millions of dollars. These cost estimates, even if they are very rough, will help determine the preliminary scope of the technical feasibility study. In addition, any potential for cost sharing between the municipality and any of the other partners in the project, for example the local utility, should also be mentioned here, as such potential cost share will impact the cost-benefit analyses conducted as part of the technical feasibility study. And finally, if there are any scheduled energy efficiency upgrades or renewable energy system installations that could support and leverage the impact of the microgrid, for example, local government energy audits or projects funded by New Jersey's Energy Savings Improvement Program, ESIP, these should be identified here as well, again because they may impact the economic feasibility of the proposed microgrid project during the feasibility study phase. A preliminary discussion of project financing should also be included in this section of the plan. A range of potential financing options are currently being used to fund community microgrids, and while the actual option or options that are most appropriate for a specific microgrid project will be identified and described in the technical feasibility study, a preliminary list of such options should also be described in the microgrid development plan documents. A microgrid can be built and funded in phases, and for many circumstances this may be a preferred option. For example, each distributed energy resource technology can be engineered, procured, and constructed separately under different financing structures. Then the DER technologies can be connected and a master microgrid controller can be created. Descriptions of potential sources of funding or technical support can be explained in this section for each type of DER technology that is planned to be used in the microgrid. The development of distribution infrastructure can also be phased, and a description of how the project integrates with the city's overall planning process should be included in the development plan as well, as this can reduce infrastructure costs dramatically. To complement the preceding cost discussion, the anticipated benefits from the proposed microgrid project should be described in as much detail as possible in this section of the plan. These potential benefits will be critical to securing both public support and financing for the proposed project. A good place to begin is describing the central benefits that have been key drivers of the microgrid planning process up to this point, typically cost savings, increased power reliability, and enhanced community resilience. This section should also describe why the facilities proposed in the development plan specifically need to have resilient and reliable power, and how this is also important to the surrounding region, for example, surrounding towns that are dependent on shared medical or other emergency resources. If applicable, it can also be helpful to discuss in more detail why a particular critical facility, for example, a specialized trauma center, is vital both to the town and the surrounding region. Benefits during emergencies should be discussed together with the microgrid's benefits during non-emergency periods. Technical benefits that could be discussed in this section of the plan include the following. Is the utility experiencing reliability or power quality issues in the area where the proposed microgrid will be located? Will the proposed project increase power quality or reliability, and if so, how? What are the anticipated benefits to the utility system? For example, does it facilitate demand response or load management programs implemented by the utility? Will the microgrid increase energy efficiency overall? Economic benefits could include, will the proposed project contribute to business or economic development, and if so, how? What are the economic benefits to the microgrid customers and to the grid customers, and will the microgrid lower peak energy demand costs? Discussions of the potential environmental and societal benefits of the microgrid should also be included in this section of the plan. On the environmental side, questions such as, will the microgrid use technologies that reduce the facility's greenhouse gas emissions, and will the microgrid increase energy efficiency, should be asked. On the societal side, questions such as, how specifically will the project contribute to overall community resilience, should be asked. In addition, what critical functions will the microgrid support during an electric service outage and for how long? And how many people will the proposed microgrid be able to shelter during times of emergency? All these considerations will form part of the cost-benefit analysis that will be undertaken during the feasibility study phase. While it may be very preliminary, a general discussion concerning who will potentially own, manage, and control the microgrid and the power it generates is an important component of a complete microgrid development plan and will be a very significant input to a full audit-grade technical feasibility study. The four most common ownership models currently being used for microgrids are utility-owned, public or community-owned, third-party-owned, or some form of public-private partnership. Whatever model is identified here, it will probably evolve and change over the course of the feasibility study. Nonetheless, providing an indication of the model being considered now in the microgrid development plan is a good place to start thinking about this critical issue and will lead to a more effective feasibility study going forward. Local utilities are critical to the development of any community microgrid. The utility knows and understands the lines, circuits, and interconnections of the grid better than any other entity, and collaborating directly with them is the best way to maximize the benefits for both parties and make the system as seamless and efficient as possible. In addition, depending on the distribution configuration of a proposed microgrid, it may be beneficial to use part of the utility's infrastructure, which provides even greater reason to involve them in the process. And the local utility may even take an ownership stake in a community microgrid. For all these reasons, it's important to establish a relationship with the local utility at the earliest stages of the microgrid development process, and to formally identify their potential roles and responsibilities as a specific component of the microgrid development plan for a community. The next section of the microgrid development plan should include a high-level outline of the technical feasibility study that will be the next phase of the microgrid development process. The goal of the outline is to establish a preliminary scope, schedule, and budget for the feasibility study as a means to better understand the costs and timeframes involved and to serve as the basis for securing funding for the study itself. To the extent possible, it is useful to include a very preliminary scope of work and schedule for a technical feasibility study on the proposed microgrid in the development plan. This could be helpful in soliciting bids for this work from interested third parties and would likely be required by any funding agency providing feasibility study funding assistance. Such a scope could include the following: a preliminary list of the tasks to be accomplished in the feasibility study, including what will be done, what type of person or organization will do it, and what the outcomes should be, a description of how the stakeholders identified earlier will be involved, including roles and responsibilities and expected deliverables, a description of how the project integrates with the city's overall planning process, together with a description of how the project will leverage or integrate with other capital projects underway in the city, which can result in significant cost savings in the distribution system. A rough timeline should also be included to ensure that all stakeholders have the same understanding of the amount of time it will take to initiate and complete an audit-grade technical feasibility study for their community microgrid. If possible, estimated start and stop dates for individual tasks should be included, along with a list of key deliverables and milestones. Although there are no hard and fast rules, a typical feasibility study should take somewhere between 12 to 18 months, depending on the scope and complexity of the microgrid being analyzed. In most cases, the timeline should be closer to 12 months than to 18. A key aspect of any technical feasibility study for a microgrid is a cost-benefit analysis. As can be imagined, this type of analysis can be complex with a wide range of moving parts, particularly when it comes to estimated energy savings and other potential microgrid benefits. In order to optimize a microgrid system design, a series of complex calculations need to be undertaken, requiring sophisticated modeling software typically implemented by energy engineering professionals. There are a range of such modeling software packages, both public and proprietary, available on the market. If, over the course of creating a microgrid development plan, a specific modeling software package has been identified, it should be included in the plan as part of the technical feasibility study scope discussion. The microgrid development plan should also include a rough estimate of the potential cost to undertake a full audit-grade technical feasibility study on the proposed microgrid. Creating such an estimate may require some professional assistance. And note that this estimate is separate and distinct from the ballpark estimates generated earlier in the microgrid development plan for the full costs of the microgrid itself. Once the feasibility study estimate is generated, it should be formatted into a budget that tracks the scope and schedule that were created earlier including, if possible, a proposed payment schedule. Potential sources of funding for the study, for example from a grant program or a third party, should also be listed here. The final section of a microgrid development plan should include information on potential participants in the team that will implement the technical feasibility study. If a consultant has been identified at this point, information on the experience and qualifications, specifically with respect to microgrid feasibility analyses, should be included. If a consultant has not yet been identified, a brief description of the types of experience and qualifications desired for that role should be provided if possible. In addition, information on the individuals and organizations from the community who will participate in the feasibility study should also be included. Who will be the team lead? What are the roles of local government officials and/or municipal departments on the team? These may be similar to their roles during the planning process. What are the roles of other stakeholders, facility owners, civic organizations, etc.? Which stakeholder organizations and individuals will be directly engaged on the team? Do any community stakeholders have specific microgrid or electricity generation experience? The goal is to identify a set of individuals and organizations who have the skills, experience, and commitment to shepherd the project through the technical feasibility study phase and ultimately to generate a final microgrid development strategy that can be financed, procured, and constructed.